If you're just joining, we're talking about how to determine risk. So usually in the past, I would size my trades according to the strength of the trade. So if a setup was an A setup, I would take, X amount of size for that trade. And if it was B setup, C setup, I would basically allocate a position size for the type of setup. Okay. It doesn't really make sense when unless your stop is 0. So what I was explaining is, so the strategy is identify trade. That's the first step. So like Tesla calls over 281 as a setup. All right. So we've identified that as an opportunity. And let's say we want our stop to be, 276. Like if you look at the chart, like where the initial trigger was 276, let's say that's our stop. And we want to enter calls over 281 here on the break. All right. So instead of taking, let's say that your risk, instead of taking a certain size per grade or per position, you want to define it based off your risk. So I like to, let's say that your risk for an A setup is $1,000, or B setup is $500, or C setup is $300. For example. Okay. If you are willing to risk $1,000 on the Tesla trade and your stop is 276, now you need to do math to figure out what the contract premiums would be, so you know how many contracts to take. So if you pull up Tesla, if you go into Thinkorswim and go to the Analyze tab and click Add Simulated Trades, you can go into Tesla and you can click, let's say, the 285 call. It's going to add it as a simulated trade below. Just keep it to one contract. And then up at the top, you go to risk profile. All right. So you can see it's going to create a graph for you of your risk analysis. So on the bottom, it will show you where the price is currently at. And if you drag to where your stop would be, which is 276, in the bottom left corner, it's going to tell you how much the position will be down for one contract if it hits your stop. So right now it's saying the premium based on this model would be down about $100. Okay. So the premiums are currently at 245, let's just say 250. So down $100, they would be worth $1.50 per contract. So you could put your stop at $1.50 per contract. Now, in order to know what that risk is, that's like 60% on this week's contracts, right? So if you consider that a C setup, let's say, so you're willing to risk $500, that means that you can take 5 contracts because the premiums will decay $100 a piece if it hits your stop. And if your risk for a C setup is, say, $500, then that means that you take 5 contracts. If your risk, if it was an A plus setup and you're willing to risk, say, $1,000, because that's just what you predetermined that you're willing to risk on an A setup, then you would take 10 contracts. So your size, your actual position size will vary depending on where the stop is. And but I prefer to keep my stop based on where the levels are in the chart, not just arbitrary percentages.